Welcome to the Profit Able Podcast, your go-to resource for tips to grow your business and live your best life. I'm your host, Terri Milroy, and each week I'll be bringing you insider strategies to help you build a profitable coaching business or online course while also cultivating a lifestyle that you love. Get ready to up-level your income and your joy as we dive into today's show. Let's do this. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Profit Able Podcast. I am your hostess, Terri Milroy, and I am joined today by Rossalyn Delfino. Rossalyn is the owner and founder of Tula's marketing company and Big Business Energy Academy, and I am so excited for our conversation today. Rossalyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Terri. I'm super excited to be here.
I am really excited because we're going to approach this discussion from a little bit different perspective. But before we go there, why don't you tell everybody who you help and how you help them?
So I actually run a social media marketing agency and now newly founded Big Business Energy Academy. So Tula Marketing Co. helps businesses thrive in the social media marketing space. And Big Business Energy Academy was actually born out of Tula's Marketing Co. We would come across a lot of smaller businesses who wanted to enter the social media space, but they couldn't do it because for budgeting purposes, they couldn't hire a full-time social media manager quite yet. So I designed a course called the Social Media Mastery course for them to go ahead and just be able to enter the market without having to spend on a full-time social media manager. There's also a bunch of other courses on there that helps monetize your brand if you just have a large following, but you don't quite know what the product is and how to launch that online. So there's several different courses in there, but that's where Big Business Energy Academy, it really stemmed from having small businesses thrive and eventually become big businesses.
That's awesome because lots of small businesses, I can attest to that, cannot do a full-time social media manager. And social media is something that no matter how much you think you know about it, it changes constantly, right?
Every week. Like at this point, I'm like, I wish we could talk to Meta and just be like, or Mark Zuckerberg and just like chill out on these updates, please.
Yeah. Could we please just like tape you to a chair for a little while and not
We don't need any more updates. We don't need any more platforms.
Yeah,
let's start there.
That's a fact. We don't need any more platforms. I think also for small businesses, they don't necessarily know what the correct platform is for what they're intending. Isn't that true?
Yeah, what I find all the time is that a lot of small businesses will just kind of go on every platform because that's what people tell them, like go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, go on Instagram, and all of a sudden like they're everywhere and they can't keep up with it, and it's time consuming because they'll find that a lot of the time. So it's sort of like I get in there, I'm like, okay, let's just reel it all in because there's no point of starting 5 different bridges if you're not going to finish the first one.
Absolutely, that is such a good point. And I also think that when you are on so many platforms, that's also more temptation and opportunity to doom scroll, which is also a huge waste of time. And then you're having even less time for your own social media for your business.
The app fatigue is a thing, guys. I mean, I seriously don't have notifications on for my emails, which a lot of people find that insane. But I'm like, if you realize how many emails I get and how many social media accounts I'm logged into, I can't do it. And it's actually a way to streamline your focus.
That is an amazing point too, because I know that as someone who's still working a full-time job and trying to build my business, focus is something that is in short supply some days. So having those notifications go away maybe is where I need to go.
Oh yeah, turn them off. I actually do this thing called like I do time slots on my calendar where like, okay, from 2:00 to 3 p.m. I'm only doing this. And no one else, even if my phone rings, unless it's an emergency, people know only to call me unless it's like an emergency. Right. I'm not going to answer. So, and that's how I'm able to accomplish so many social media accounts, so many tasks at the same time.
That's awesome. So tell us, do you work with a team? Do you have some part-time help? How do you manage all of that? Other than being very careful with your time.
I don't do this alone. I do have a team. Every contract requires different necessities, and depending on the necessity of the contract, we allocate a designated staff member, or we designate a specific. We collaborate with other actually agencies or other people who have businesses who perhaps can fulfill that need. So every contract's different, but for the most part, no, guys, I don't do this alone. I know sometimes people see me on social media, they're like, how is she like at two places at once? I'm like, I'm not. I am very blessed to have a team that I build. One of the biggest things that I always say is delegating actually helps you step out of this employee mindset role that a lot of times we're in. And you don't have to have a full-time person. You literally can get a virtual assistant online to help you just even clean out your inbox or put in this list of emails in your email marketing system.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice that you collaborate with other businesses because,
Yeah.
let's share the wealth, right?
Oh, I'm all about it. I live in this full of abundance. And I like to think a lot of the reason why my business was able to thrive so quickly in such a short amount of time really came down to the idea that I didn't think of like, I get competition from a marketing and a business standpoint, but really it's like there's enough to go around.
Yeah.
So why don't I learn from you and you learn from me and we collaborate together?
Yeah, I believe that the world is more than abundant enough for all of us rather than thinking that there's a pie. And if you get a big slice of pie, there's no pie left for me.
Oh yeah, no, that is not all I believe. Let's all grow together.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's go down a little bit of a road because you and I had a conversation offline and we were talking about the fact that one of the things you're really passionate about as a female business owner is the issue of gender expectations in business and how women are sometimes viewed differently. Tell me a little bit about that.
Ooh, okay. This is a big topic, guys. So as a woman in business, there's been so many things that I've ran into. Let's start with the physical part of it, okay? So as a woman, biologically, and it's very hard to the 40-hour work week, okay? The full-time work week was really designed around a man's schedule. And I say a man, like literally, like they're not getting periods, they're not expected to get pregnant, right? And when you look at a 40-hour work week, like, guys, tell me how many of us as women can we actually perform that one week that we are actually, on our periods? And people don't talk about these things, especially because there's so much like there's endometriosis, which I suffer from, PCOS. There's so many conditions out there. And especially if someone is pregnant on top of that, it's a whole thing that we're expected to basically produce the same amount. And we put that on ourselves probably the worst because we're like, oh my God, like that person over there that's having the same role as us, that's a man, that's a male figure, can perform and still produce, and we have to do the same. But by doing that, we basically push our bodies to the edge because that's not how hormonally we are designed. We are designed to be different, and it's actually such a beautiful thing that should be embraced.
I think that's an amazing point. And, women are kind of cursed at both ends of the spectrum because young women, not only have the issue of their cycles and having children, if that's what they choose to do, but then later in life, women are the only ones who have to go through menopause and the hormonal changes and the energy changes and the physical changes that come with that as well.
Yeah, and I think of it myself when I used to be in the corporate world. There was a week and I had to tell, thank God I was blessed that my managers both had the same condition that I did, which is extremely debilitating. I can't walk like barely a few days because it is that painful. I can't drive. So at that time I started going to the office. So they would let me come in later or make up the time the week after. So they understood exactly what I was going through. And I was only 22 years old, like just entered the corporate world. It was a law firm out of all places. Yeah. So there was no slack there. And I remember just like, I would go in my car during my lunch breaks and just sleep because I would get these fatigue spells. And I would be crying my eyes out because I was in so much pain, but I still had to be there. And it happened every month. So it's not like, oh, I can take some time off or whatnot. And just that stress that I put on my body actually made everything worse for me physically. Believe it or not, like by us actually pushing to that extent, it made my periods worse. It made my health worse. I was getting sicker and sicker each time.
Yep. I was actually going to say one of the things that I think is probably true, and you can tell me if you agree or not, is that the more women push themselves, especially during times of the month when hormones are out of whack or when they're having issues, we don't tend to eat as well. We don't sleep as well. We don't make enough time for things like play or even exercise or taking care of our bodies, some sort of yoga, stretching, meditation, whatever. And so we actually wind up being worse off than we might have been otherwise.
So we were doing, I don't know if you follow, I follow so many people that they actually run their businesses according to their cycle.
I have seen that.
And I love that. That's actually something I'm implementing myself, where it's like that first week, you're, after your period, you tend to be in a stage of where you're the most creative. So you should be applying very creative and like your strategy sessions, everything during that week. And the second week is like another phase of it. And it just depends on your cycle and how your hormones are balanced. That fourth week should actually be rest. So therefore it should actually be an easy week for you. So don't plan like hard trips or these 3-hour strategy sessions. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, like this makes sense to me as a woman, because we're operating still. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many things that are we live in a patriarchal society and people don't want to admit it. We still do. And even down why the offices, did you know why the offices are still kept so cold?
Because men need to be comfortable in their wool suits.
Exactly. And when someone told me that, I was like, are you serious? That's never been updated from like the 1970s.
Because men's suits are still wool. I mean, why do we still make men's suits mainly out of wool? I don't understand that, but
it's just insane to me that we're as ladies, we're typically wearing like dresses or skirts.
Yep.
And I'm freezing. I'd be in these offices freezing my butt off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such an outdated concept. But a lot of these things have not been updated to our standard society. I think you're going to start seeing a shift in that, because think about how much more we could honestly like raise the vibration of the planet, but also get more done as women if we stop like trying to align ourselves with like, it's not saying that we can't get the same stuff done as men. It's just that we do it differently in our own feminine way, which is absolutely a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Let's go for a second, because I love this topic. And I actually read something about this just recently. I have several friends who, because of accidents or illness or whatever, have had to have hysterectomies and go into early menopause. And what I was reading was that the same principle can be applied to women in that situation by just following the cycles of the moon, because that's kind of the same thing as what we're talking about. Do you agree?
So I've heard the cycles of the moon thing. I don't disagree with it. I just don't know enough about it.
Sure.
So I think you should fit to whatever your own cycle is to a certain degree, but would it be naive for me to say guys, if you guys know me, I'm very logical with everything. So when it comes even down to frequencies, I'm literally saying like atoms. Is there a gravitational pull that changes everything? Of course there is. That's why there's bigger waves when there's full moon. Does it impact our bodies? Of course it does. To what degree that is, I'm not quite sure, because I haven't seen the studies in front of me. But do I think that everyone should kind of explore different avenues that best fits their own bodies? Absolutely. The important here is to listen to your own body and not just follow a plan that's always been, this is the way things should be, because I can't stand that. Just because this is how it should be, this is how it should always be done. Guys, throw that out the window. No, and we should actually embrace who we are as women.
Absolutely. So, given that as women, we do operate a little bit differently. I mean, mentally, we are sharper at different times of the month. Physically, we have more energy to keep going at different times of the month. Do you see that there is, not just in business, but especially in entrepreneurship, because that's a lot of who is going to be listening to this podcast. Do you see that there's still gender bias in the entrepreneurial space?
All the time. All the time. All the time. And it burns me to my core to even have to say something like that, because it's infuriating. Honestly, you will see men who are especially like, you know what, I'm, work hard, grind, blah, blah, blah. This is just the way. If you're sick, get over it, And first of all, as women entrepreneurs, no, we don't need to fit that mold, because guess what? They can't literally create another life. Like, they physically can't like create another life inside them like we can. So first of all,
Right.
that is a beautiful thing in its own. Second of all, as women, especially me as myself, like when I walk into certain events, I'm actually going to say certain events, most events I go to, I go a lot of networking events. I'm in these rooms with these big CEOs and everything else like that. The women that are my age, I'm 27 years old, are typical people who are entry level, or they're trying to climb themselves up in the corporate world. But the people who are actually the business owners and the CEOs of them, they're men, and they're older. So I'm, of course, in the big minority group of like, oh, here's this girl. The amount of time someone's like, oh, what company? Or I'll say, yeah, I run a social media marketing agency. And they're like, oh, okay. So like, who's the owner? Like, they don't, it's like in their head, I would say 75% of the time I say that statement, I'm always asked like, oh, so like, who's the owner? Or like, what's your position in it? And it's like, no, I run it. But it's so funny because like the moment I've heard someone else, like I had a guy stand next to me saying, oh yeah, I have a social media marketing agency, or I run a social media marketing agency. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. So you own it. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, how is that a thing? And there's so many perceived biases, and I find it with men all the time, where they either try to like sexualize me essentially, or you get that a lot of the times when you're when you're talking to some of these men, or in other parts, it's sort of like they look at you kind of like you're dumb. Like, there's almost like because someone looks a certain way, because someone presents them, and I'm a huge girly girl. I love to be dolled up. I love to have my nails done. They think they're like, oh, she must be dumb or not that smart. So those are things that, and I've been told, like one of my mentors, he's an attorney. I love him. And he was the first one. He's like, Rosalind, like the way you look, everything about you, you're so smart, but you're going to have to fight a little harder, because of the fact that this is just the society that you are in.
Right.
And I am so happy he did say that to me. I'm so happy that was put out there. And I'm so happy that, those things that unfortunately still happen, you still kind of have to prove yourself more than an
Right.
actual man does.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting because there are so many more, at least in all of the circles that I am inhabiting right now, there are so many more women who are dipping into the entrepreneurial space. If you get into a Facebook group, or, join a coaching program for entrepreneurs, there's a vast majority that are women in a lot of those programs. And yet you hear so much more about the men who have made a success of it. And
all the time.
I don't know if that's because, do you think that it's because men are being raised up for their success, or do you think it's because they are tooting their own horns louder than we are?
So I've actually had this conversation before in the past. I think a lot of it is that they are more willing. It's not necessarily they might be doing better. Like if you look at it from a percentage standpoint, okay, it could be 5 women making the same amount as 5 men, but men will definitely have more of like, because society's like, it's okay to boast, it's okay to say pridefully, like, let me puff out my chest, essentially.
Yes.
If you're looking from an evolutionary standpoint, because before, back in the day, a man was big and mighty if he was like, if he lifted, if he could, because he got to defend his family against nature, right?
Right.
Now a man is big and mighty if he has money, because that technically says that he can provide for the family. It's like subconsciously, guys. I'm not saying this is all accurate. I don't want someone out there to throw some shade at me for this. We're not like biologically and psychologically built like that. Now, do I think we should go out there and say, hey guys, I've earned XYZ? Heck yes. And that gives us the freedom. I talked to so many women in the corporate world too, especially when I was in there, where men are like, I earn XYZ. And women did not talk to each other about how much they made. Like, they kept that a hush-hush secret. So what did that do? That means they couldn't go to management and say, hey, that person is making XYZ, like I should too. But men talk about it all the time. So it almost like keeps us like, because we have this fear of talking about money or fear of talking about like we should just basically be grateful for what we have, it actually like deters us from earning more.
Yeah.
Technically. So and you hear that in the entrepreneur world all the time. That's why I used to be so afraid. One of my mentors now is, he's had a social media marketing agency. He's a world-renowned author. He's about to launch his new book. And he actually said this, he's like, I was so afraid to talk about on my social media about like being vulnerable because I didn't want to perceive as weak, but also talk about how much money I'm making, this huge contract that is signed. And he's like, why not? He's like, are you looking for a date or are you trying to be a business owner? And it hit me because I was perceiving it from a dating, like well, what if a guy that I like looks at my profile? I don't want him to feel a certain way. Like I'm looking from that standpoint, which is insane to me. And the moment he said that reality to me, I was like, you know what? I will talk about how much that contract was worth. And hopefully that will inspire someone else to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole because what you just said really made me think. We don't, as women, talk about the money that we make because sometimes, and we've been taught to some extent that men might not want to date you if you make more than they do, or if they perceive you as being more successful.
Oh, yeah.
And to some extent, that's like many other things in our society today. That's an expectation of women doing emotional labor for their relationship, for the family, that men don't have to do. How, as women, especially young women like yourself, how do we get past this idea that women are responsible for emotional labor and be able to be feminine and, you know, have the relationships that we want with people, but without feeling like we also can't be successful and proud of our success and an example to other young women?
So I talk about this. I was very shy about talking about this until actually a few months ago. I'm very big about being being in your feminine energy. And also throughout the day, guys, if you don't know, so masculine energy and feminine energy exist in all of us, okay? For obvious reasons, women tend to have more feminine energy than masculine. That just has more to do with hormones, etc., and vice versa with men. And I found that especially in the entrepreneur world, the women that I was running into who where they're so in their masculine energy that they weren't probably operating like they weren't operating in the best energy that they could, but two, like they came across harder than they really needed to be. Yes. And I'm not saying words like, am I allowed to cuss on this podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I'm not saying words like bitch or anything like that because sometimes people call women that who are just trying to stand up for themselves. I'm literally saying like they were really actually kind of not nice people at the end of the day. And I don't think that's naturally who they were. I think society made them like that because they felt like they had to be like stronger, right? Because of the confrontation they had to confront. And I realized like, you know what? Like, I want to be like a dressed up and be a girly girl, like the Elle Woods guys of the world. Those awards, I've always won the next Elle Woods and whatnot. And I love Elle Woods' story because she was so comfortable in being who she is, right? Like dressing up in pink and everything else. Like there's an attorney I follow on social media. She literally got fired because she wore too much pink because she didn't fit the stereotype in her law firm, got fired, and she started her own pink law firm. And it's, by the way, widely successful. So congratulations to her. I would love to one day meet her. She's like such an inspiration. But she's also a great example of that, how she's so much in her feminine energy, but is also out there being a kick-ass lawyer.
Yeah.
And I think in today's society, we need to be like, stop trying to be so much like men, because I see that all the time in some girls. Like they come off like where it basically becomes men hating, like,
right.
You know, well, like we hate men or we should hate men and don't be proud of that man and all this stuff. And I'm like, why? Like, I would love one day to be proud of my future husband, you know, if he's doing something great, and my sons and everything else. But it's about being comfortable in who you are. And I think that's why you see so many women fighting that battle. So I actually am talking more about on my social media, for example, I'm very open about, hey, you know, there are times to be in your masculine energy. You know, like I am very much in my masculine energy when I'm running a business and I'm on meetings and leading a team. I understand. but there is also a time for me to be my feminine energy when it comes to more personal lives, when it comes to maybe like my brand building. I'm very big about brand building and who that represents. And that to me, down to the colors, is all like my feminine energy.
Right. Right. I think it's so unfortunate because I agree with you. It's kind of like, as you were talking about some of the women out there, it reminded me of the movie The Devil Wears Prada.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite movies, but Glenn Close's character is just like so hateful. And then there's these moments of incredible vulnerability, and you're like, is this just the persona that this person has adopted in order to be successful? And why do you have to be that way? Because I know that one of the things that I pride more than anything is being self-integral, and pretending to be something I'm not just isn't, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't feel good. I can't do it well. And I think that each of us, whether we have a little bit more feminine or a little bit more masculine energy, needs to be able to be really open about who we are and be accepted that way. And we shouldn't have to worry about whether we are more feminine than some of the other women in the business world.
And I completely agree with that. It's kind of like we just keep, what I don't like about, the only thing that we do wrong, honestly, as women, is that we tend to go up against each other a lot.
Yeah.
If you notice that. Okay.
Yeah.
And it drives me kind of mad because I want to celebrate other women. I want to uplift other women. And when we see each other, like, men don't really do it as much. Women do it all the time. It's kind of turns into a cat fight. And I remember one of the girls that I coach, she reached out to me on social media and connected with her right away. And I told her everything about, like, hey, this is what you should be doing, blah, blah, blah. She wanted to start her own social media marketing agency. And she's like, thank you so much, because I feel like when I reach out to some girls, they get kind of like defensive. She's an influencer and she's a really pretty girl. But they just like, they don't really want to help me. And then you reached out, popped on a call and like, tell me all your secrets. And that to me was like, wow, like, I'm so sorry to hear that, but like none of us should be doing that, to be honest.
Right.
Like, there's enough to go around. If anything, that's how we uplift each other as women in general.
Right. And what if that pretty girl was actually your daughter? Would you treat her the same way? Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So as a social media expert, how do we portray ourselves on social media in a way that is very authentic if we're a more feminine person, but that also conveys authority in our space without those two things, without having to subsume one for the other? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow. That's such a great question. So I don't have the perfect answer to this. I will tell you what I do. Okay. Personally, I struggled with the balance before of, I was putting too much masculine energy out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked it to a certain degree until I realized it didn't feel as authentic to me as an individual. So I was honest with myself one day, and I really didn't want to talk about it because there's so much controversy around the word,
Yeah.
and a lot of like lashback. And I was like, you know what, like, I will never grow if I don't say something out there that's just, one, genuine, what I believe in, who I am, and two, like, maybe it will inspire someone else. So I think pick your 3 content pillars. So when we go through any social media strategy with anyone that we work with, you should pick 3 content pillars. Okay. One should always be promotional, whatever you are selling, promote out there. But the other 2 one should be personal. And it could be, for example, in my case, mine's business related. The other one is faith. I'm very open about my faith. And the third one is about your feminine energy, which I'm going to start actually putting a lot of content regarding that, especially around dating.
Yeah.
So that's such a huge topic that, as women in our 20s, for example, and 30s, especially, that we're all trying to specifically date, and we're finding, like, I talk to people in different generations, and dating is just so, I feel like something happened in my generation where it's like, we're so disconnected. Like, I'll talk to my friends that are in their 40s and they're like, we did not run into those issues. But I think a lot of it just came from having that accessibility on an app.
Yeah.
And different apps for that matter, where it turns you can turn having a relationship without a physical like touch, essentially. So being in your feminine energy is so important. And I think we have a society start talking so much about let's be the same and blah, blah, blah. And by no means does it not mean that as a woman cannot do the same thing as a man. I know women, doctors, lawyers, etc. I'm a business owner. But I also think we should be very comfortable in who we are as women in our feminine energy. So pick the topic that resonates with you. And even if it scares you guys, like I talk about my faith very openly and everything that I do. I will tell you that, but whatever you do in life, believe in something bigger than yourself. And I'm not scared of that. I'm not scared of someone unfollowing me or getting backlash, because that is just an open conversation that I have all the time. And I think that's the balance we need to draw on our platforms, on any platform that we use, is talk about what you offer to the world, your service, product, whatever, but also come out with that touch of who you are as an individual. And Terri, that's why you and I connected so well right off the bat. I believe it's just because you're still in the corporate world. We've talked about this and how it's so hard as a woman to still be a businesswoman and still be in the corporate world. And want to actually still be with our families. And it's a battle we're constantly fighting every day.
It is. And it's, to some extent, I don't like to over discuss the topic, because I don't want younger women to think that it's all bad, because I've had some wonderful experiences. But as you alluded to earlier, one of the funny things that I do admit sometimes is that some of my worst corporate experiences have been with other women who think that they have to put me down in order to lift themselves up. And I would love to see a world where that is not the case.
Yes.
Where as women, we are a united group and we lift each other up and celebrate each other. None of my friends celebrate themselves enough, because there's so much burden placed on people who are, workers and mothers and caregivers and whatever. And someone seems to always be making them feel like they haven't done enough. 15, 16 hours a day. It's just not enough. Do you think that your generation, because you're somewhat younger than I am, do you think that your generation is moving past that idea of giving your best is not enough, or do you think that you all still feel that as well?
I personally feel it. And this goes with me saying, in the sense of, Terri knows I was unfortunately in the hospital about a little over a week ago. And it turns out I should have gone in earlier. I started having pain in my abdomen area like days before that. But I rubbed it off because I was like, I have meetings, I have things to do. And I'm like, I have to produce. Like, there's no time for this. And I even shook it off as like period pains or something like that. And unfortunately, it turned out to be very bad, where I was hospitalized for days. Thank God, like I basically had to be dragged into the hospital, the ER. And if I would have gone in a few days later, I could have gone septic. So because of that, I realized, like, why did I do that to myself? Like, I should have just stopped and I should have gone in, because I was still pondering on Wednesday. Like, that's how bad the pain was already. I'm like, I should go to the ER. It doesn't feel right. And I waited till Friday. And the doctor was like, you would have waited a few more days. You could have gone septic. So it was a reality that it hit me. And I think as women, we're so hard on ourselves. And one day, like, I'm not a mom yet, but I hope God blesses me one day with that. And I understand that especially when I talk to women business owners who are mothers, where they're like, well, we can't spend too much time on our business because then we're not spending enough time with our children. And then society makes us feel bad. And it's like, when you hear this dialogue, I always like to rephrase it. Well, you have a partnership, like with your partner and your husband. Like, it is a team. And at least that's how I was raised in like a household. There's different responsibilities, but at the end of the day, it's not all on you. And I know that for a fact from just seeing like my personal family members, seeing how they were able to raise us and other people within my family culture that everything we were always taught is like, whatever you do, whatever partner you find, make sure you do it as a team.
Yeah.
And that's something that's so ingrained in my mind, that I'm not looking for someone to complete me, or I'm not looking for someone to save me. I'm looking for someone to be my team member and walk alongside me.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that sometimes that team falls apart, right? Through death or, divorce or whatever happens. And women need to understand that when you become the primary or even sole caregiver of children, as well as someone who has to go out and earn a living to support those children, you can't expect to be always the very best in your work environment and always present for your kids and always providing every single thing that there's so much pressure in that. Being a great mom and also being a good employee or a good business owner and, providing everything that a two-person household, a two-income household is providing for your friends' kids. It's so much pressure. And women need to understand that that's not healthy to adopt.
It's not, it's okay to my agency name is actually Tula's Marketing, because my grandmother was a single mom that raised 5 kids, and then she would adopt the other neighborhood kids. So I actually named the business after her to honor her. And she was a hardworking woman that owned a business in a small village in Peru, raised 5 kids by herself and adopted kids from the neighborhood. And I always think about her. Like all the responsibilities she placed. And at the end of the day, she actually ended up dying a lot earlier, because she actually worked herself essentially to death. She was very stressed out all the time. She wasn't paying attention to her health. And she had so much on her plate because she was a single mother. She didn't have anyone else, that it burned her out to the point that it cost her life. So I think about that. And when I think of it to that extent, something I always talk about with my aunt and mom is, well, how could we do things differently? And one of the things they said is that you need to learn how to ask for help. And that's something that she didn't know how to do. Like, she was so like, I'm going to do it. 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 I'm going to do all of it. But she didn't really ask for help.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us as women, sometimes we're afraid to ask for help or admit. I have clients who they hate to admit that they have nannies.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? Why are you so afraid?
Good for you, right?
Like, why are you so afraid to admit that you have a nanny? Well, Rosalind, like, I don't want people to think I'm not taking care of my children. I'm like, but you are. You do so much already. And it's like, it's okay to ask for help in different capacities, whether that's to have a nanny or a family member or friends, or different programs, whatever that entails. But I can't believe even at that level, people are still afraid to talk about those things.
Yeah. And asking for help is a big one. And there are a lot of us, especially a generation or so above you, that were taught that it's not okay to ask for help, that it's your responsibility, that your home and your family are your responsibility. And I think it's so important for women to understand that there is never a time when it is inappropriate to ask for help. If help is something you genuinely need and not something that you're just trying to avoid doing whatever in order to get it.
It doesn't make you lazy or less of a woman to ask for help.
Right. Exactly. Nor does it make you incompetent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. A lack of information or a lack of skill does not make you incompetent. It just means that you need help until you can learn it yourself.
Amen to that. Yes. I love that, Terri.
Me too. Well, I think this has been such an important conversation because I see so many women beating themselves up as they're trying to build a business. I applaud you for how well you have done. You have an amazing business already in place and at a pretty young age. Not to say that age has any factor in it, but there are a lot of people who would look at you and say, wow, she's very young to be the owner of a successful business. So kudos to you. But I think it's really important that we all acknowledge that it is so wrong for us to be having different expectations of women, whether as entrepreneurs or as employees in a regular 9-to-5 workspace. women and men have the same abilities. They just work differently.
Amen to that. I love that. And that's the best way to phrase it. It's like we can all accomplish the same things, just in different ways. And
Absolutely.
I think that should be embraced. And guys, it's a beautiful thing to be different from the crowd. I trust me, take it from someone who's always wanted to be in the group. And I've eventually learned like a couple years ago why I was never meant to be, why I never fit into any group, because I was always meant to be different. And so are you.
Absolutely. Who wants to be a cookie cutter? I don't.
I was thinking about it from an evolutionary standpoint, why we all want to fit into a box.
Yes.
And it really is just to keep us safe. But we live in a society now that there's hopefully no bears right outside your window, right? Or lions trying to attack you, where most of us live more of a civilized society. And you guys can be yourself, whatever capacity that is. Embrace that and actually be different. If you look at what actually trends and what goes viral, there are people who just either did something really outside the box or who are someone who's just vastly different. And if that doesn't tell you anything, like, I don't know what does. It just means that when you just keep fitting in the box, you're going to stay there. And the world at the end of the day will just you'll get drowned out in the noise.
I really love that. And I'm really glad you said that, because before we finish today, I think it's also important to acknowledge that when you try to be something that you're not, when you try to fit in that box, that's why we have such a mental health crisis in not just the United States, but in so many places in the world, because especially with social media, there are so many people who think that they don't fit, that because they're different, they're not right or good enough. And I think it's so important for those of us who are making our way in the world successfully to say you shouldn't try to fit. You should be different.
It should all be embraced. So with social media, especially because I find it all the time on there, it's kind of crazy. I like when I sometimes go in the comment section on people just to see what people say. And it's crazy that you can have 100 people saying you're beautiful, you're this, you're that. Thank you so much for saying that. But one person could literally say one negative thing and it tears down all those 100 other nice comments that someone made. And I was like, wow, why do we do that to ourselves? Like, first of all, it's more a reflection of that negative person commenting than it is on you. Let's just clear that up.
Yeah.
But second of all, like, why do we tear each other down to that extent when there's 100 other people saying how courageous and beautiful you are as an individual?
Yep.
And that to me is like, it always reminds me of like, okay, at the end of the day, social media is only showing you highlights of what each individual is allowing you to see. You never, one, know the full story, but two, you should just be kind to yourself. And the whole point of it is really to stay informed and can get connected in a positive way. You can utilize social media in such a good way to raise the earth's frequency than just making it about negative Nancy complaining with God knows what.
Right. And those people who are their authentic selves and who aren't concerned with the trolls and the negative comments are going to attract people who might otherwise not find someone who can help them, right?
Yeah. And with mental health, guys, I mean, someone who has suffered with mental health issues before, like, it's okay to also disconnect for some time and find your center. I think some people, they get scared. I have my social media notifications guys off. Like, there's certain things that even I don't want to see. I will literally go to someone else and like, hey, can you read this for me? And it's okay to put boundaries like that for yourself. It's okay to put those parameters, and it will keep you at the end of the day, like everything you see, if you see someone that's going every day, they probably have a full-time social media manager, one, so they're not posting themselves. And two, like, they're so disconnected from it. There's things that I schedule out for clients that it looks like I take B-roll content that I'm at the beach the week before and I use it for next week.
Yeah.
So everything's like planned out. I'm sitting on my couch in pajamas, guys. So you got to realize there's things that we do from a marketing strategy that's a lot of it is very scheduled out. So don't always believe everything you see on there. Be just authentic and be comfortable with who you are. Just know that there's always more to the story.
I think that's an amazing place to end. Why don't you tell us where the listeners can find you?
So you can find me at Rossalyn_D. So that's ROSSALYN_D. And on there, you can actually go on all my Tula Marketing Co. social media pages as well. Everything's tagged on my bio on there. I can't wait. If you guys want to send me a DM, I would love to get connected with you. I love seeing people that reach out to me or comment, especially once this podcast goes live with Terri. I'm super excited. Terri is so amazing. And she's been such just a heartwarming experience to just be on this podcast. So I'm highly honored to be here. But thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, Terri.
Thank you. It's been so great, Rosalind. I'm so glad that we did this, and maybe we'll do a follow-up soon. I would love to do that.
Ooh, follow me up in a year. I did one. Thanks. We could be around the world.
We could be in incredible places by then. Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, Rosalind, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing where you go from here.
Thank you, Terri. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the Profit Able podcast. I hope you picked up some useful nuggets to implement right away to increase your profits or your ability to live that good life. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with any coaches, course creators, or lifestyle design seekers who would find value in this content. When we support each other, we all rise higher. I look forward to bringing you more real tactical tips to grow your business and enhance your life on the next episode of the Profit Able podcast. See you then.